You are listening to the Two and Out CFL podcast, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
Grab some poutine and a double-double. It's time for the Two and Out CFL podcast.
He's got it! Oh, baby!
Every week, Travis Currah.
That's Grey Cup me, which is a different person.
And Brazilian Tide.
Hunters are people too.
Talk fantasy football, bring you the latest in CFL news, and sprinkle in a little bit of nonsense.
Oh, nearly intercepted, it is! And it's over!
Ready, set, hunt!
And joining the Two and Out CFL podcast now is second-generation CFL player, 1993 Grey Cup champion, Jed Roberts. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And it's the 30th anniversary of that 93 Grey Cup season, so I'd like to relive some memories today.
Oh man, happy to be here. It's that was a fun year, so I've always got time to tell stories about that group.
I guess I first want to ask you, it kind of does seem like the alumni for the Edmonton Football Club are one of the proudest groups, I think, across the league. And great reason, great success together. But lately it's been a little tough. And I just noticed that Matt Dunnigan on a broadcast, he said that it's starting to become a little personal with the struggles that have gone on. And I know you're an optimistic, positive guy. Is there sort of a feeling of disappointment with the alumni as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, our expectations are, you said it kind of to lead off this segment there, the pride among the group, is well earned because, we were pretty fortunate over the years to have a lot of success as a group. I kind of came in at the tail end. I played with some of those 5 in a row guys, like Kangalisic, Rod was there. And that the stuff that they passed down to us, we passed down to guys like Ricky Ray and Seymour Mobley and AJ Gass, right? And so on and so forth. But it just seems like, recently in the last maybe, I don't know, probably since 2007, it's been kind of, things have sort of, for whatever reason, there's been sort of a tailspin in the franchise. And with the exception of 2015, when they won they went on that run and, Mike Riley carried the team on his shoulders and they had that really great defense with Chris Jones. I think that there was a lot of reason for optimism when Chris came in because, he did have success here before. And so I don't know, it's just a confluence of a whole bunch of really unfortunate things that have come together, kind of lead us to where we are right now. And, and you are right. I'm an optimistic guy, but when you get shut out twice and you don't make it into the red zone, 2 straight games against 2 straight guys against the same team, it's kind of tough to see the silver lining and everything. And, when people are talking about, things aren't changing and they're not doing anything different. And that's really tough to, kind of, defend. So it was nice to see today when they made the change that they did with bringing Jarius in there he was already there, but to kind of put him in a position where he can be up in the booth and to mentor the quarterbacks and try to have a little bit of a different approach. So hopefully something different comes out of it. So,
were you ever on a team that struggled? Maybe not to this level, but still struggled.
Well, 6-12 in 1999, we were, if it wasn't for Saskatchewan, we don't make the playoffs that year. We beat them 3 times. So thanks Saskatchewan. But we, and they were in the boat that we are in right now, right? And I have to kind of remind people that, what, as bad as things are here, there were other franchises around like Ottawa and Saskatchewan that went through this for 25, 30 years, and but yeah, the expectations have always been really high around these parts, and it's tough, but every franchise goes through it. It's at one time point or another, and I guess it's our turn, but hopefully they can turn it around.
Now, I'm looking back on the 93 season, and I even go to the off season because there was a remarkable trade that kind of set things in motion with Edmonton drafting Mike O'Shea and then promptly trading him to Hamilton they trade O'Shea with a linebacker, a quarterback, and a Nagless player. But that brings back Damon Allen. It kind of feels like one of those trades that worked for both teams. O'Shea got most outstanding rookie. Obviously, Damon Allen is Damon Allen and ended up winning the Grey Cup that year, and that's what everybody sets out to do at the beginning of the season. But that's one of those, I'm just mind blown about that trade. Like, Damon Allen coming in must have been big, obviously, at the beginning of 93.
Yeah, I remember I was driving down the road and I had just gotten a cell phone. And one of the first phone calls I ever made with my cell phone, it was a Nokia, those red ones. And I called my teammate Trent Brown, and we just got Damon Allen because I heard it on the radio, and we were just really excited. But it wasn't just that trade. I said to him at that point, Trent, I said to my teammate, I said, we just won the Grey Cup. And we were both kind of like, because the year before, we were struggling with Tracy. Tracy was having a really hard time throwing to the wideouts. He would only lock in on the slots, right? And we didn't really have the running game at that point because we were running with an all-Canadian backfield that was kind of a smash them out, pound them out, grind them out type. But we didn't have a breakaway runner because Reggie Taylor didn't come back. So, he was a really good back. I think he rushed for 1,500 yards, I think, in 91, and then he didn't come back for 92. And we had a couple of Americans that we brought in and auditioned but got rid of very quickly, Mike Pringle being among them. Which, so we had a little bit of there was a little bit of consternation, and it just felt like, we went out and we picked up Lucius Floyd, which kind of gave us a little bit more of an added dimension to be able to throw to her, because he was a guy that was catching a lot of passes out of the backfield in Saskatchewan before he came to us. And not only that, but it was the 6-for-6 trade where we sent Craig Ellis and a host of others over to Toronto for Bruce Dixon, J.P. Escuero, Leonard Johnson. We got a whole bunch of guys that came in and were impact players. Donnie Wilson. I think Reggie Pleasant was in there. Like Ed Barry. Like, it was an amazing trade. All of those guys. We don't
see trades like that anymore. Like,
no,
that's wild.
And I remember looking at that and going, what is Toronto thinking, right? Like, they just basically sent all of their best players to us for Craig Ellis, who was kind of on the tail end of his career. I think we got DK Smith out of it too. So yeah, it was wild. It was a wild trade. And so on the one hand, you got a lot of turnover because you got all these new guys coming in, and we had to figure out how to kind of put everybody in their roles. But that's kind of what we always sort of did. We would always reload. We never rebuilt. And we were never a team that was really known for that, rebuilding. We just sort of kind of brought in another lineup and said, okay, we're going to kick your butt again this year, right? So I really get too familiar with rebuilding until I got to 98 when we had David Archer as a quarterback and Cave Stevenson as the coach. And then 99 when we brought in Don Matthews and we went 6-12. So I was spoiled. I never missed the playoffs the entire time I was here. My 13-year career, I never came close in 99, but we were always in the playoffs, and I could always budget for, I'm going to have extra money in the playoff time, right? Yeah. So just, you don't get, your playoff money isn't guaranteed. If you don't make the playoffs, you don't get paid, right? So that was just, we just took it for granted. We always had a home playoff game, and we always had extra money come playoff time. So it's different for sure.
So how's that playing under the little general, Ron Lancaster? I mean, is that big for getting all of those new guys gelling during training camp going into the season?
Yeah, and Ronnie was a guy that he was known for bringing in his guys and then letting them play together, And so what we did was we had this core group of guys that came in kind of all together around 93. And we all played together for about 5-6 years. And it just seemed like we sort of aged overnight. And then that's kind of what happened in 99. We had all these veteran guys, and, Benny went to Winnipeg, and we lost, Larry retired, Larry Ruck. And, we just lost Rod was gone. It just got, and that happens, right? You see the women's soccer team yesterday, they're getting a little long in the teeth, right? And it's, you got to replace those people. You have to have a succession plan in place. And Ronnie was great. Once he got his guys and you were one of his guys, you were good, but there wasn't a lot of turnover from one year to the other, right? So, and we didn't really have a succession plan in place for quarterback. When Danny left with Ronnie, and after the 97 season went to Hamilton and took Darren Flutie with him, we weren't really left with anything. So Cody Ledbetter, our backup quarterback, went too. So we didn't really didn't really have much to work with, right? So they brought David Archer in, and we went 9-9, and we were mad about that. We were like, "Oh, this is unacceptable," and little did we know,
Yeah.
So
No, I look at that first game. You play in Toronto and you crush them by 30 in the home opener. It's 38-8, and I just wonder now, when there's a Grey Cup team, like, is there something? And you had said it on the cell phone, the Nokia, that hey, we just won the Grey Cup. Is there a special feeling right from the get-go once you show up to the facility on the first day?
Well, we knew we had the pieces,
Mm.
and getting everybody together, and that's one of the benefits of having a strong culture as an organization. I think you see that in Calgary. Calgary's been able to kind of keep, and their alumni is really good at kind of taking care of the guys when they're done playing, and so people want to play in those places, and we had that here. We had everybody was pretty well established in their careers. Like, I think our entire offensive line had probably paid their houses off while they were playing,
Oh
and
wow.
they would work their regular careers, and then we would reschedule practices around our day jobs, and we would come in and we start practice at 3 p.m. So people would be working 9 to whatever, and then they come in after their day jobs were done, and then they go to practice, and that was just the way it was. You don't do that anymore now. It's more of a all day thing with, the guys kind of play on their PlayStations and stuff like that. Now, back then we didn't really do that. Like, it was a Canadian dominated roster, and you're really seeing sort of the disappearance slowly, the erosion of the Canadian content in the league, and they call them nationals now, and it's just change. It's the one thing you can count on is things changing, right? So it was just a different approach to practice and life back then. It was more about, there was more emphasis on making sure that you were established off the field, and that football was just kind of something that you did when you weren't working your regular job. Now it's quite a bit different. It's more of the emphasis on, this is your job. If you have time to do anything else, then schedule that around it. We're not going to work around you anymore. So, but that team was really cool because we had a bunch of really talented people come in and just sort of, and we had a couple of guys that Damon had been there before. He knew all about what
Mm-hmm.
it was to be part of that organization. And, we had Reggie and Don came in, and Ed Berry. Those guys all, they were very professional, and they were really good at, what they did. And we just didn't really miss a beat. And Rick Stubler, our defensive coordinator, was a guy that, he was just amazing in terms of, like, he was doing things like Bill Belichick had
Mm.
was running match coverage back with the I think it was the Cleveland Browns, and Rich kind of picked that up in the offseason. He brought it in, and we worked it as a change of pace thing, because the big team back then, they had picked up Doug Flutie, and we had to figure out a way to kind of slow him down, because they had a tendency as Stampeders to line up really wide on their offensive line. They had like 3-foot splits, which is unheard of. You don't see
Wow.
that anymore. And what they were trying to do is create running lanes for Doug Flutie. And so what we started to do is we would play a kind of a zone, but it looked like man. And so we would run with guys and then drop off into our zones, and would give Flutie a little bit of a bit, because he couldn't understand what we were trying to do. The next year, what they did was they started running double moves, and then that's why they used to beat the crap out of us in Labor Day, because they'd have these little adjustments that they would do. But I'm kind of digressing. But we beat Calgary that year 3 times out of 4, and nobody else. They won 15 games and lost 3, and we beat them twice in the regular season and once in the playoffs. And the only team that we really couldn't seem to beat was Winnipeg. Winnipeg used to run this throwback scheme where Matt Dunnigan would set up behind the tackle, and then he would throw back on the backside post or whatever. And he had the arm that he could throw that backside corner.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a rookie safety at that point, or a very young safety, Dan Murphy, who would really bite on the first, like, if Dunnigan would look him off, he would go running on full speed 20 yards and leave the middle wide open. And you saw the results of that the year after in '94, when they threw for 713 yards against us, because they were so angry with us for winning the Grey Cup. But I'll take my ring over
Yeah.
713 yards passing any day. But it was an interesting year because we couldn't beat Winnipeg. And so we went into the playoffs in the Grey Cup. Winnipeg was pretty confident they were going to beat us, even with their backup quarterback, Sammy
Wow.
Garzik,
Yeah.
because Matt Dunnigan ruptured his Achilles at the end of the season. And they still managed to beat, who they needed to beat in the playoffs to get into the Grey Cup, and I think they were pretty supremely competent. If you ever watched the pregame introductions, the Blue Bombers players walked when they did the introductions because they were so mad. They thought they were being disrespected all week because everybody was saying that we were going to beat them handily because their backup quarterback was playing.
Right.
And they were really angry. And they actually even managed to make it a game. If David Williams catches that pass at the end of the game, I don't know if we're, and I think, and I've always said, I've been very honest, if Matt Dunnigan would have played that day, I'm not sure how well we would have done because we just had a real hard time playing against that scheme because of some of our positional weaknesses in that at that point. I think as time went on and we went away from Dan Murphy and we started playing Trent Brown, we weren't that susceptible to that backside stuff because Trent wouldn't get looked off so easily. But it was a great group. We were really strong at what we did. And when we played Calgary, we seemed to match up really well with them and nobody else could figure them out. But we did that 1 year, just for 1 year, we figured Calgary out. So it was pretty cool to win down in Calgary. That was really special. We put Edmonton Eskimo stickers up in the tops of their lockers. That didn't go over too well. That's one of the other reasons why they started coming out wearing black on Labor Day, and they just would beat us like we stole money from them, which we kind of did if you really look at it. So
I find it interesting. You kind of bring up the work football balance, the work life balance, because since 2020, it feels like the rest of the world has kind of prioritized life a little bit more than work. But it seems like pro sports has kind of gone the opposite way. I even think about baseball. It's like guys are chewing tobacco in the dugout, like things have just completely changed. But football, I find it interesting because everybody kind of looks at that era of CFL football thinking it's the most exciting brand of football ever, and now fans attribute maybe some of the more defensive battles to being, there's less practice time, there's less all this. But it seems like that didn't bother you guys in the early 90s at that time.
No, we knew it was it was game, we knew it. And we always came. And the other thing about having the group of guys that we had was that we knew when to have fun, but we also knew when it was time to work, and we didn't need to be told to do that. We were really, really we all complimented each other. And I'm thinking specifically on defense. We had that Leroy Blue, we had Larry Rock, we had Trent Brown, we had nose guard that year. It was Tony Woods, who's since passed away. I played with Tony, actually. I played against him in high school in Colorado Springs. So I was really it was a thrill for me to play with him because he was one of my idols, actually. I looked up to him. He was a year or two ahead of me. We had Malvin Hunter. It was his rookie year. Came in from the World League of American Football the year before. Errol Martin, it was his rookie year. We just had so much talent. Errol Martin could run a 4.340 and he was playing defensive end,
wow.
And he wasn't even starting. So we had so much talent, and I think people don't understand how talented Leroy Blue was. He was a strong side rush end and he would regularly take on 2 or 3 guys. And that would just leave room for Willie Plus to roam. And, when Willie's not being touched, there was nobody better. I've always said that Willie was the best sideline to sideline linebacker I've ever seen. He just was always around the ball and was always making plays and recovering fumbles and, knocking people around. It was just a fun group to play with, and then off the field, they were very, very funny. We had Gizmo Williams, who's probably to this day the funniest person I've ever known, and he would do things off the practice field or even in the meeting rooms or even on the planes. He would take over the intercom and just start talking, and he would run like a 10 or 15-minute routine, which wouldn't be out of place on any, the Showtime at the Apollo or whatever. He was as far as, improv stuff, he was amazing. He could make anything, he would be sitting there trying to kill time and he would just go on a 20-minute bit and I would ask him to just stop talking because I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard.
Did he have a temper? I hear some of the stories that
Yeah, he did. He had quite a temper. Actually, in '98, he got really mad at, and I think it was because Kay Stevenson wasn't playing him. And he got really, I was toward kind of the end of his career. And he got really angry at Leroy one day in the locker room, and I'm not sure what prompted it, but he actually brought a gun to practice one day in his car, and he actually went out to his car to get it. And me and Leroy chased him, and we convinced him not to bring that gun into the locker room. So people will never know, you know. I mean, the half the stuff that happened was unbelievable. Like, I try to tell these stories, and people are like, "What, really?" I'm like, "Yeah, man. Like, you have no idea." You know, it's just like any family. Like, sometimes people are, you know, people fight, people argue, people, you know, and you have a good time. But we all loved each other, so it was always, you know, we always, you know, hugged and made up after. But boy, it got pretty heated sometimes.
Now I look at the Labor Day rivalry that you had with Calgary, and I even almost compare it to Hamilton and Toronto. It feels like Hamilton and Edmonton are bring the lunch pail to work day, work hard, go home, have big steak and potatoes, and that's it. Toronto and Calgary are like the executives, you know, telling people what to do, the flash, you know, and did you take that to heart? I mean, Doug Flutie and the Stamps, they're crushing everyone, they're high flying kind of thing, but you just put the hard work in and beat them, like you said, 3 times.
Yeah, that year we did. You know, we struggled with. I know, because when I got there in 90 and 91, I think we won on Labor Day, and then that was when Wally came in, and he did a really good job of shifting that whole mentality around that franchise and telling them, you know what, you're not the little brother anymore. You're the big brother. And, you know, when they got Flutie, that really, you know, it just kind of went from there. And then they just seem to always have somebody waiting in the wings, which is what great teams do, you know, and that's something that talked about earlier about how Ronnie didn't really have a plan B. He just kind of left, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we're having such a hard team now with the Edmonton franchise, is that there just isn't really thought to like what's going to happen next year, and they're just kind of just making it up as they go along. And I think the good organizations like Calgary, and I think even in Edmonton in those days, we always had a plan for tomorrow. You know, the stabilization fund and, you know, all these other things. But playing Calgary, it was just when we would go down there, it was just the people there would always, like, when we would go out, and it was like, do you really think you can beat Calgary? And I'm like, not only do I think we can beat them, I think we're going to beat them and we're going to win the Grey Cup. And you're like, oh, you're crazy, you know? And so it's always good fun. And we were committed, you know, we made a commitment to doing and playing together in a way that would, you know, counter what Flutie was trying to do that particular year anyway. And, you know, it was just for me as a kid growing up playing football in the U.S., you know, and watching Flutie's immaculate, you know, the Hail Mary throw. And, you know, I was just starry-eyed, you know, and I actually that year in 93, I had 10 sacks. And then my 10th sack was against Doug Flutie on my birthday at home on November 10th. And so.
What a birthday present.
That whole year was just one incredible, like, you know, and I actually, that year, the tragically hip came, and Bruce Dixon was friends with the guy that was running the security, and they were playing at Clark Park, and we all, Trent Brown and I and Bruce Dixon and a bunch of us were dancing with our shirts off in the front row in the VIP tent to New Orleans is Sinking, and it was raining, and it was amazing. And because we just really liked each other right off the field, and we were friends, and you know, and not every team does that, you know, like a lot of teams, guys just show up, they practice, and then they go. But that's one of the reasons why it's good to have the same group. You have some carryover, some continuity, you know, and you get to know each other, and, you know, your families become friends. And that was certainly the case. Like, Trent and I played together for 10 years, and we just, you know, even to this day, we're really close friends. And that's one of the things, like, when people ask me, do you miss playing football? I mean, do you miss being, you know, a Grey Cup team? And I'm like, not really. I miss the relationships. I miss the fun and watching Gizmo run naked across the stage during training camp while a coach is trying to give his opening speech. But other than that, I don't miss the physical aches and pains and the bruises and the pressure, you know, the mental stuff. It's a grind. It's tough, but you know, it's somebody else's turn, and I really enjoy watching the game and following along. And I'm a fan just like everybody else, and I get upset when they lose, and I get depressed when they're not doing well, and, you know, and take it personally and stuff. I probably shouldn't, but I do.
Now, is it cool even now that they honored the 93 team early this season at Commonwealth, seeing those guys that maybe you haven't seen for decades? Is it almost like an old friend where you just pick up right where you left off?
Oh, Oh, absolutely. Michel Bourgeot, who was our long snapper that year and was on the tail end of his career, that was his last year. He was a former first round draft pick in Ottawa, and he spent most of his career there. And then he came over, I think, just prior to '89, and he was part of that 16-2 football team. And he was a mentor to me, and he was also hearing impaired. So our equipment guy, Dwayne Mandrusiak, in his infinite wisdom, decided to partner up the two hearing impaired guys, and we missed every wake up call that year. And so Ronnie was like, "Why do they keep showing up late?" And I'm like, "Because we're deaf, coach. Like, whose bright idea was that?" Right? So they split us up after that. But when Michel came out, it was really nice to see him. We went for breakfast over at the Chateau Lacombe, and we told that story. We told a whole bunch of just wonderful. It's just really nice. And you're right. You just got to pick right up where you left off.
Yeah.
When you go through things like that, when you play at that level, and it's like that. I'm sure, when you play high school sports, you get that too, and then high school was kind of the last level I played where you just play because you love it. But I was that kid was just so deeply in love with the game that I was always, I always considered myself fortunate to be able to play a boys game for a living. And Michel had that approach too. Michel used to really piss the O-line off because he would always go really, really hard. Even when it was the day before a game and nobody had any pads on, he was going full speed, and he was always trying to tackle the quarterback. And the O-lineman used to try to fight him because he was just like, "Chill out," and Michel's like, "I only know one speed, man. Besides, I can't hear you." And him and I would have a really good time with that. But it's the personalities, it's the funny stories and stuff. That's what I miss the most.
I gotta ask you, how were those 2 trips to Sacramento that year?
Oh my goodness. So Trent and it's been 30 years. I can tell this story. We went down to San Francisco actually the night before the game, and we stayed up all night long. We didn't get any sleep. We went out because Doug Parrish was from San Francisco, and he was our defensive back. And so Doug was like, "Yo, man, I want to take you back to my hood, and I want to show you where I come from." So we went to San Francisco, and we drove up into Oakland, and I remember, I think the game was an afternoon game, and I'm pretty sure that at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, Trent was freestyling on the street corner in Oakland, and we were the only people that weren't of color for miles around. And I look back now, and I'm going, "What were we thinking?" And so we managed to get back to Sacramento and on no sleep. And I had a sack, and then Trent wasn't supposed to play, but somebody got hurt. He ended up playing the whole game, and we were both exhausted, but we won the game. So I think we went straight to bed right after.
Let's just go to the playoffs here. You did earn a home playoff game. I've been to Oakland. I went to a Raider game. I can picture this in my head, man.
Yeah.
The playoffs, you earn the home playoff game and crush Saskatchewan 51-13. And if you look back on the season, well, they beat you by 1 in week 2. And then you beat them 35-3 in week 3, and then the playoffs happen. What do you remember about that home semifinal?
I remember one of the things I really liked about Rich Stubler is that when we would start our day one and he would give us our scouting plans, and this was when we used to kill a lot of trees and have everything on paper. Now it's all on iPads and stuff, but back then it was all done the old school way, and those guys would kind of go through it meticulously, do it by hand, all the tendencies and stuff. And his first speech would always be about who we were facing that week and psychologically what that quarterback was like. And he was amazing in that he could get in that quarterback's head, and he could tell you, what are the things that this quarterback likes to do? What are the things that what makes him strong? What makes him weak? And one of the things he used to always say about Ken Austin was, and I don't know if this is him personally, but I know that his style of play was, he used to say that Ken Austin was a selfish player, and that he was only you could look in the waning minutes of a game and he's throwing a dump off to his back and they're down by 30, and he's got guys open downfield, but he's trying to get his completions.
Oh.
And so Stubler was convinced that, he was a guy that couldn't throw downfield that well. And then if you could like defend everything deep and react up, that sooner or later those guys would make a mistake. And as luck would have it, I think early in that game, I think Bearholm got hit by Larry Ruck. And he was kind of like their, they had their really good slot backs there, Elgard and Bearholm. But Bearholm was their one deep guy. Narcisse was more of a possession guy. But Bearholm had some speed. And when he got out, he got hit. And I think he tore his hamstring. That was pretty much it for them. They weren't going to really do anything downfield. And they couldn't really run the ball against us. So, that game wasn't very tough. We just sort of figured that we were going to win that game going in anyway, because I think Rich had sort of figured out Ken Austin as a quarterback. Postscript to that, a couple of years down the road when BC, I think it was 94, BC was using Ken Austin and Danny McManus. It was hard because we knew that Ken Austin couldn't beat us by throwing downfield, but McManus could. And so we had to play two different styles of defense, and then it was tough. So I'm digressing, but that was kind of how Rich Stubler was always the guy that would give you insight into like how this guy was preparing for us. And we had to learn the offense. We had to learn how they blocked everything, and we had to learn what they were doing out of whatever formations and stuff. And so, it's one of the other things I missed was the knowledge that I gained by just listening to this man talk. He was brilliant.
Now, it's kind of interesting because to win the Grey Cup, you didn't have to leave Alberta again. You go to Calgary for that West Final. And even now, I hear sometimes it's brought up that maybe that bye week in the semifinal isn't always the best spot to be for that first place team. It happened to Edmonton in '89. You mentioned the 16-2 team, and the Stampeders here 15-3, and you go in and beat them by 2 touchdowns. Was it maybe the Labor Day win that gave you that belief you're going to go in and take down the first place Stampeders who want to play in their own stadium for the Grey Cup, but you robbed them of that?
Yeah, we were generated a fair bit of momentum. We kind of went in there because we had beaten Calgary the last regular season game of the season at home.
Yeah.
And it was snowing, and this isn't the case now, obviously, because Flutie managed to beat us in the '96 Grey Cup. But he had a bit of a reputation for, not being a cold weather guy, which is ridiculous because he's from Boston, which is like colder than it is here, really, if you're being honest, because there's moisture. But that was the perception. And that day, that Western Final, it was a hellacious storm. And I still maintain to this day it was the coldest game I've ever played in. It was the wind was coming in at 60 kilometers an hour, and it was very difficult to get anything done. The heaters were freezing up on the sidelines. It was just a miserable day. But we had Sandusky and Jay Christensen, who both kind of went off that day, and Damon. That's when we were doing that Sally Rand where he would fake the handoff and kind of hide the ball on his hip, and you couldn't tell if he had it or not, if the running back had it. So it was very difficult for the backside linebacker. You would freeze him, and all you needed to do was make him stop, and Damon had you. And so we rode that wave, and Damon just played that off to perfection for those 2 or 3 weeks that we needed him to, and then the rest is history. And Calgary just didn't have an answer. And I think that we were a little bit overconfident. I'd heard that Sapungis had gotten 35 tickets or something for people, and we got wind of that. We got pretty upset because he had already given them out, basically guaranteeing everybody that they were going to be in the Grey Cup. And we took
Grey
that personally.
Cup tickets. So, wow.
Yeah.
So is that a thing? Billboard material? Even maybe that's not, there was, I don't think that would have made the paper, but even that little word of mouth thing that you hear that you're that confident. Well, we're going to show you.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that's really cool is that it's an insular league and that everybody kind of plays, at least the CIS guys, especially back east. Bunch was from Western Ontario. We had Dumoresque who played with him, and Pierre, I think, had left by then. But we had guys that all kind of knew each other, right? And so there was a lot of word of mouth. It wasn't as much the media and stuff like that, because it's totally different beast now with social media and cell phones and stuff. But back then it was more about like everybody kind of knew each other, right? So people were talking, and that's kind of where we would sit there in meetings, and those conversations would start to, it was organically sort of a thing that kind of took on a life of its own. And we just decided collectively as a group that we were going to take that personally, and the results spoke for themselves, I guess.
Now, the Grey Cup, I see over 50,000 people at McMahon Stadium for that one. And I'm trying to imagine now 50,000 in McMahon and the logistical nightmare it is to be in the stands.
Yeah, it was
Which-
amazing. But
yeah.
nobody told me that they were going to bring the snowbirds, right? So I'm
Oh,
sitting there
wow.
at the national anthem, and I'm hearing impaired. I can't hear anything. So I just tell whoever's standing next to me, just tap me when they're done, right? And then all of a sudden I hear the earth shaking, and I think there's an earthquake. And I'm like, I just about wet myself.
The
And then
stadium's
Jay's
crumbling.
like, just relax. He's just the snowbirds. And I'm like, well, whose idea was that? You know, I just about lost my mind, right? So
What was the
that's what I remember.
preparation like that week? Was it fun? Were you all dialed in or were you
Yeah, you know
loose?
what? You know what? The first thing I remember is we went, you know, you obviously go down, I think it's Tuesday, and then your first practice is probably Tuesday at home, and then you fly out and you go. And we, in this case, we drove, obviously. And we went to an event, and I will never forget this for as long as I live. But we walked into a tent, and there was maybe 10 people in there, and everybody's wearing cowboy hats and stuff. But I don't know if they were setting up. It was just a fluke. And there was a guy playing guitar. It was Colin James. And I'm
Wow.
standing there, just me and him, and he's like, "Well, what do you want to hear?" And I'm like, "Well," and I told him, and I asked him if he knew how to play any Eric Johnson, or, you know, because I was, you know, I like the Cliffs of Dover and all that, so he played that for me, and I was just like, "Wow!" I was pinching myself. This is incredible, right? So, and that whole week was like that, right? The Grey Cup is just an amazing experience, you know. And it's one thing to take it in as a player, but it's a completely different animal as somebody that's not participating. And you know, I've been lucky enough I got to participate in 4 Grey Cups in 90, 93, 96, and 2002, and I played in 2. But yeah, that was my first memory. And it just got better from there. You know, like there was just an aura, like a mystique, and it's just an amazing experience. And prep was, I don't really even remember the practices, to be honest with you. And it's the
Wow.
same with the 96 Grey Cup. You know, I just remember it being unusually unseasonably warm. And the game, I think it was +2, +3,
Chinook.
and there was a bit of a Chinook run. Yeah, and I remember Bob Cameron and Glenn Harper just booming punts in the pregame. I think Glenn actually averaged around 46 yards a punt that game.
Wow.
It's one of the highest averages ever in a Grey Cup. So it was fun, you know. It's I actually, both Grey Cups I played in, I didn't really do anything. I don't even think I had a tackle in either game, so I was just kind of there. But it was just fun, you know. Like it's a different it's like times 10 of anything that's going on during the regular season, save for the Labor Day game. The Labor Day game has
Yeah.
a lot of that emotion and, you know, lots of hard feelings and stuff. But yeah, the Grey Cup was incredible. And the other thing is that my dad had won 2 Grey Cups in 68
Yeah.
and 69. So I remember talking to my dad before and then calling him right after and being emotional. And, you know, he was watching the game back in Ottawa. So that was really, that's one of the things that, you know, I don't think I appreciated it then, but I sure do now, you know, us both being on that trophy.
Was Lancaster on those Ottawa teams still, or he had gone to
He had
Saskatchewan?
gone. He left.
Oh, okay.
He was on the
Yeah.
60 Grey Cup team when
Oh,
they
yeah,
won in
okay.
1960. I think he was playing defensive back that year.
Oh, wow,
And then they moved him over. Actually, they had to make a decision between him and Russ because Ronnie was, you know, and then they decided to stick with Russ because he was Canadian, and then Ronnie left for Saskatchewan, and the rest is history. So, but there was definitely an Ottawa connection because I saw Ronnie speak in '86, I think, and I was just my first year of college, and I remember introducing myself to him after, and my dad telling me, "Man, he threw for 50,000 yards. You know, nobody's ever thrown that far before." And, you know, so it was a big thrill when I learned that he was going to be our head coach.
Cool.
And, you know, I don't know if he remembered me or not, but I sure enjoyed playing under him. So.
No, the last loss of the 93 season actually came in September to those Winnipeg Blue Bombers. You mentioned that kind of struggled defending the Matt Dunnigan-led offense. He didn't play in the Grey Cup, and you got up to a 17-0 lead after the first quarter. As a player, personally, I'm a Rough Rider fan. I know what it's like to be leading by 19 in the first quarter and have it melt away. Is it hard to kind of keep your emotions down? You know, there's still 3 quarters to play, even though you're up 17. And Winnipeg did kind of fight back in the second half.
Yeah, they did. We, you know, you're talking about in the Grey Cup when we got up. Yeah, it just seemed like we jumped all over him, you know. And then we recovered. I think we blocked a punt, and then we also recovered a fumble. I mean, it was just like bang, 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 and then before you knew it, we were up. And then it was I just remember thinking we were all sort of saying, "Listen, don't relax, don't relax," and they started to chip away. It was I think Sean kicked 6 field goals, and so it was like we couldn't score touchdowns, but we were getting points, right? So we were just sort of taking what we could get. But I just remember at the end of the game, Garza threw a really long one, and David Williams just barely dropped it. And if he catches that, I'm not sure we're having this conversation today. So,
Wow.
yeah. So, I mean, even though they didn't have Matt in there, those guys were a veteran group. You know, they had these, monsters on their O-line like Miles Garrell and Chris Walby and Chris Johnstone was their fullback. He was really good. And they had Robert Mims as their, they were just, and their linebackers were insane. They ran that 3-4 with Battle, Jones, West, and Randolph. That was an all-star. Like those guys, I think might all four be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if Rob Randolph's in there, but they just didn't have any weaknesses on defense. Right. And so we didn't take them lightly. That's for sure. So when we were up, we weren't taking it for granted. We wanted to kind of keep our pedal to the metal. And, I do remember late in the game when our offense needed to put a drive together. I think Larry Ruck had an interception, and then we just sort of drove the ball until the game was won, right? And so, Jack, hats off to Winnipeg for making something out of nothing, because it sure changed the chemistry of their offense without having Matt in there. Matt just had this swagger about him that you just knew you were in trouble, because he could make every throw on the field and he could run, and he was a little bit crazy too. He played with the linebacker mentality, so he had that impact everywhere he went. People just loved playing for him and hated playing against him. So.
I'm sure there's probably a double E sticker or two still in the Calgary Stampeder locker room, but how long did that celebration last?
Oh my goodness, that was probably the greatest I remember Dwayne Mandrusiak saying to me, because I actually helped them load all the bags. I was just soaking in the moment, because my dad had told me that, like, soak it all up. And I was the last one out of there. I helped them load all the bags into the bus, and Dwayne looked at me and he goes, "You do realize this is going to be the greatest offseason you've ever had?" And it certainly was that and more. Like, we took that Grey Cup everywhere. Trent and I were celebrating one night, and we left the Grey Cup unlocked in his car overnight. Yeah. Oh boy. Anyway, the club was like, "Where's the Grey Cup? Where's the Grey Cup?" And so we had to drive it, over to cross town in the morning at 7 a.m. to get it to the office, because they had it booked for a function that day. So
if that thing could talk, the stories it would tell. Did you have like a designated day, or was it just, hey, it's free today? Well,
the latter, because I remember we ended up getting it, and I've had the Grey Cup quite a few times. I've eaten Count Chocula out of it. I've taken it. Yeah, I remember we took it to Moe's sports bar, and some girl and I said, "This is the Grey Cup," and they're like, "That's not the real Grey Cup." And I'm like, "No, we took all this time and effort to create one that looks exactly like. Get out of here!
Dented up.
Yeah. You're not getting a drink from it, So that was before everybody was worried about COVID. So
yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. I just kind of want to ask you about what it means to be on the Cup with your dad. And there's been some stories from recent years. It was one of his Grey Cups in Ottawa where they didn't get rings until very recently. And recently, I think you just recovered one of his old uniforms.
Yeah. I have his
really
uniform.
Cool things happening.
Yeah, that's his uniform right there up on the wall. So
wow.
They got watches actually in '69, because it was a new owner who had purchased the team during the offseason between '68 and '69. And then that kind of didn't really sit well. I think the quality of the watches wasn't that great. So in a really cool gesture, the surviving sons of the owner, who had long since passed away, for the 50-year anniversary, pooled their money, and they bought all the surviving alumni and families of the players that they got rings. So that was a cool gesture. My dad, the watch that he had had long since been, misplaced or whatever. But so that was kind of cool to be able to receive that on behalf of my dad, because my dad passed away in 2011. And then also with this jersey, I just got a random message, out of the blue on social media, where a guy said, my stepdad has a really good collection of jerseys, and your dad's happens to be among them. And I was like, what, really? That's from what year? And he said he wasn't sure, but he asked me if I was interested in getting it. And I was like, well, how did you come upon it, if you don't mind me asking? He says, well, my stepdad was among a few teenage kids that broke into the stadium in Montreal at the Autostad and stole a bunch of jerseys and other stuff from the Ottawa Rough Riders during a game. And my dad's jersey,
Wow.
home jersey, was among them. And as fate would have it, that jersey is the one that he wore his rookie year. So
Wow.
it's incredible. Yeah, and I don't have anything of his from when he played because when he got remarried after my mom and dad split up, he was with an unstable woman who took all of his stuff and left it out in the Texas sun for 6 months in a chest, and it all got destroyed. So my dad always felt really bad about that because he had all of that stuff set aside for me and my sisters, to kind of split up amongst ourselves. So it's just really cool I had I had a reunion of sorts this summer with my sisters, and I had my nephews trying that jersey on, and that was really cool. And so it's hanging up in my son's room. My youngest son's, I'm gonna get a drop box and put it in there, and maybe put it in there with a picture of him wearing the jersey. So very cool keepsake. It's one of my most treasured items for sure.
You still call Edmonton home. When did you realize it was going to be home for good?
Well, my ex-wife and I lived here while I was playing, and then when we split up in 2000, because she didn't like the Edmonton winters, and she didn't like me either. So, so she went back home. But I just realized that, my dad said something to me, when I first started playing, is that Edmonton is it's a small town disguised as a city. And he said, if you are willing to put in the work and do things and be, active and visible and raise your profile in the community, he said that community will take care of you. And that's exactly what happened. Every job I've ever had in this community has been through word of mouth. I've never really, it just seems like people here just take care of their own. And it's just an amazing, very altruistic, volunteer-oriented society. And the people are salt of the earth. And that's the other thing I always really liked about Edmonton in comparison to Calgary, is that there is a blue collar mentality, lunch pail. Everybody's got to look out for each other type of mentality, whereas Calgary is a little bit more of a, more elitist and, corporate. Whereas here we're more, approachable, and, people just kind of get it, in terms of like when times are tough, we got to count on each other, right? We can't be individuals, as much as everybody seems to be, pertinent to these days, with all the crazy stuff going on in the world. Edmonton's one of those places where it just seems like people will help each other out when times are tough, like today's that anniversary of that terrible tornado that happened, and just remember how the community rallied around each other after that. You don't see that in too many places, but this is certainly one of them.
Yeah, that's where the City of Champions name came from. I figure I better get a Calgary guy on the show to kind of present the opposing view to balance things out a little bit. But hey, thanks so much for coming on and talking about that 1993 season, all the memories and stories about that year and winning that Grey Cup. It's been lots of fun having you on the show, so thanks so much for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's awesome. And I just, as a postscript, whenever I see those Calgary guys like Bruce Covington and Stu Laird, I mean, it's all love, like we have nothing but just smiles, and they were an incredible bunch. Like iron sharpens iron, right? Like we were really hard on each other for a long time, but whenever we see each other now, it's just respect. And, it's, we were lucky. I consider myself fortunate to have been alive in that point in time, to get to play Doug Flutie, to get to see Wally Bono, the greatest head coach, one of them, if not the great head coaches. And, it was just an exciting year in the CFL, and I'd love to see it get back to that eventually.
Thanks for listening. Find more great shows like this at CF Pod Network on Twitter.